Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Reginald Lampkin with the Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology, and I'll be your host today for today's session as part of our Mastering the State Contracting Game webinar series within the Leveraging Diversity in Technology Procurement Initiative. Today marks the final installment of our series, and throughout these sessions, we've walked through the state contracting process from multiple angles, from invitations for bid and small purchase opportunities to requests for proposals, commitment to diversity, and proposal development strategies. In today's session, we're focusing on what happens during the final stages of the procurement process. After the technical response is complete and vendors move into pricing, clarifications, and post-submission activity. Our session today, price proposals, questions, and the post-submission process is designed to help vendors better understand the financial and administrative side of proposal submission evaluation. During today's discussion, we'll cover best practices for developing cost and pricing proposals, how to respond to amendments and clarification questions, what vendors should expect during the post-submission process, and how to effectively use the new supplier debriefing process starting on July 1st. For many vendors, these final stages can feel like a black box. Today's goal is to help make the process more transparent, reduce uncertainty, and give you a practical insight on how to remain responsive and competitive after your proposal has been submitted. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome back today's presenter, Chris Brinkmeyer, Agency Procurement Officer at the Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology. Throughout this series, Chris has shared valuable insight and practical guidance on navigating the state procurement process, helping vendors better understand their compliance requirements, proposal development, and procurement strategy. We're excited to close out this series with Chris leading today's discussion. Chris, we look forward to your insights. Please take it away.
Thanks, Reggie. Good morning, everyone. Oh, welcome to part 4. We're finishing up here. So we're going to go over some things that are current process, try to shed some light on some of the stuff that you may not be aware of on a normal basis. But more exciting, I think, is we're going to go over our new supplier debriefing process for what vendors can request that do not win proposals. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to kind of take a couple back steps. We're going to talk about pricing proposals first and kind of how to look at those, if it's outside of BidBuy, right? We've covered how to do it in BidBuy. We've covered how to upload pricing in BidBuy. But what if the state is using a separate price workbook? We try not to do that unless we absolutely need to, but sometimes pricing can get complicated. Or sometimes we want to see further into items. So let's share what we got here. All right. So we got pricing proposals. I think the first key item as a supplier to remember is that the state must be able to compare apples to apples when it comes to pricing. That means, unfortunately, sometimes the vendor community has to conform to the pricing as the state puts it out, because otherwise the state can't fairly evaluate one vendor's pricing against another. The state does lots of research to try to figure out the best way to capture everybody's pricing and kind of how those pricing structures go in the market for particular items and products. But you got to make sure, unfortunately, that you're making your pricing match those two. So state does pricing a couple different ways. We covered the BidBuy piece where I'll pull it over fast. This is BidBuy. It may be when you put your quote in, which we've covered already, that you're just putting the pricing right here in these line items. You go through, enter your unit cost pricing down the line items, and when you submit the rest of your documents, part of your proposal, it goes right in. That is the preferred method to use. So what we like to do here at Do It is, even if we do have a price workbook that shows more detail, at the end of the day, the pricing being evaluated is still in BidBuy. The place you need to check and make sure you really understand these things is back to the RFP document that we've covered. So we've covered all this RFP document already in the previous sessions. If you didn't catch those, please go out to our YouTube channel and check them out. But when we get down to section F.6 down here, now we're discussing pricing. So section 6.1 is the important part for you guys to check out on how pricing needs to be entered, where it's going to be entered, what the state's requiring for pricing. So sometimes it's as simple as this: offeror shall submit the pricing in the quote items tab on BidBuy based on the terms and conditions set forth in this RFP. So that's just saying enter all your pricing in BidBuy. There's no additional pricing, a place to enter pricing. If you do submit some kind of additional pricing, it's got to be on a separate document that's generated by the supplier. Then we come down into section 6.1, 6.2, F.6.1.2. That's a mouthful. So in this case, maybe this one's saying the pricing workbook should be uploaded for informational purposes. Only the pricing entered into BidBuy will be evaluated. So the point behind that is BidBuy is still going to be the place of record for your pricing. But the pricing workbook could be an additional document that's going to roll up into BidBuy eventually to show us, maybe we're asking for more detail. Maybe we're trying to make the BidBuy submission part easy on you. And sometimes maybe pricing's so convoluted that we can't find a way to put it in BidBuy, and maybe we only require the pricing document. That's going to be few and far between. There should be, in almost all cases, a way to tie it back to BidBuy. In this section, you'll see additional information, important information. If you have any documents with pricing on it, make sure that you check the box that says this document has pricing on it, because that's going to be a disqualification if you do not. I know we've covered that several times in this series, but it is extremely important. You know, it's not something the state wants to do, nor that a vendor wants to do, is to get disqualified for showing pricing. So it's super important to make sure you go through your documents when you're done. And if there's pricing in any of those documents, ensure that you check the box saying that there are pricing in those documents. So anyway, on this one, we got the pricing where it says we're going to have the pricing workbook. Okay. So I threw together a quick, simple pricing workbook, and this is kind of how all the pricing workbooks should be laid out for the state. I seen this answer come through. I'll answer your question in a second, Colleen, so I can get some clarification on what you want. These things would be attached in the BidBuy. So if we were expecting a pricing workbook, it would be attached on the items tab or the attachments tab on BidBuy for you to download and use. Everyone's got to use the same one. So anything that we're expecting you to fill out and return to us, there will be an attachment in BidBuy for you to fill out. So this is the price workbook. This is kind of the basic format of every price workbook. The tabs at the bottom may change slightly, but eventually they're going to get you all to the same place. So there should be a cover page, right? Cover page is telling you what the tabs are and what we're expecting in the tabs. So if you read this one, we have the tab names of cloud subscription, hourly rates, implementation, other, which is assumptions. I mislabeled that one when I was typing it. Support, training, and then the offers, BidBuy response. So each of these things are going to tell you, what to enter. So pricing for cloud subscriptions, please enter your cost and sell E. Same for hourly rates, enter your cost and sell E. Implementation, sell E. The important one, when we get down here to offer a BidBuy response, use this information when entering your pricing information where applicable into BidBuy. BidBuy line items match the print sequence in this tab. Enter the price from column E to the corresponding BidBuy line item. These costs auto-populate from previous tabs. So it kind of tells us what's going on. So if we come down here, we look, we have cloud subscriptions, right? So we may have this entire table for cloud subscriptions. I did not pretty this one up. I printed the other ones up. But we have a number which honestly doesn't make a difference for us. This is just so you can keep track of what you're doing. We have the description. So we're looking for the cloud subscription core base for year one, a quantity of one, a unit measurement of each, concurrent user licenses, analytic dashboards, secure cloud hosting, storage, additional storage. So if I was the offer, I'd come down, I'd be entering my price here. We'll make up some numbers just to have them here. That's all the year one pricing. So let's say we just copy and paste it all the way down. All right. So we entered all our pricing here. And now there's a total down here of 1840. Great. So we filled out cloud subscriptions. We covered our cost here. Hourly rates. This is kind of a norm, which you'll see with hourly rates a lot. We have set hourly rates we put in there, and then a lot of times we'll give you optional hourly rates. So if we go back to this cover page and we talk about hourly rates, it's going to say, here's the pricing for hourly rates. The vendor should enter their cost in cell E. The optional titles are not part of the evaluation. This comes back to the state needing to be able to compare apples to apples, right? So we have hourly rates that you need to enter. You need to make your titles kind of match up to those. But then we give you the option to give us additional titles that you may think could be used throughout the life of this contract. Those costs won't be evaluated. So, see if I come down here and enter numbers into here, let's say $6,000 an hour seems like a little excessive, but we'll go there. $1,000 an hour, 400, 300. You're not going to get any population for the total of the evaluated weights. So what we're evaluating is going to be these costs up here. And then those are going to feed into your total evaluated rates. So the optional, you could say, maybe I want to give you a architect engineer, right? So you would tell us what you're going to give, what rates you're adding, what the rate for that is, but that rate's not going to go into the evaluation. So then we get to implementation, same thing. We have different costs for implementation. They can be broken out different ways. This one's got data migration, design and configuration, integration setups, validation and UAT, go live and hypercare, and a couple API connections. So maybe we get all our costs for implementation down here. These are low costs. Okay, so then we get a total for the implementation. We're going to do the same for each of these tabs. We won't go through and do them all live because they're all going to do the same thing. You're going to have your cost for each of the things we're asking for, support Premier for year 1 through year 10, training, initial end user training, training materials, super user training, and then additional trainings for year 1 through year 10. And then we got the offer bid by response tab. So let's just throw some numbers in training just so we got them. Throw a couple numbers in here. So the offer bid by response tab. So we would be tying this back into BidBuy. So the way this would work, we would have all the detail in this sheet. But when you get to BidBuy, here's your print sequence. You would have 5 line items in BidBuy, and you would only enter the cost here in column E. So it takes all of the more complicated, more broken down, more detailed pricing and just kind of rolls it up into a place to put into BidBuy. The BidBuy prices will be what's being evaluated, so it's important that you make sure that your pricing sheet's right. But it kind of makes it more simplistic. It stops mistakes, make sure the math works a lot easier. So, and then we would give you a tab for assumptions. Vendor can enter their assumptions in the final tab of pricing. So again, BidBuy is the preferred method of pricing. Without the pricing workbook, we would include a pricing workbook if we thought the one was warranted. Very seldomly will the state have just a pricing workbook. To price workbook, pricing. All right, now let's talk about questions and answers, amendments, etc. So again, this is the RFP document, so this is where we're going to find all our information. Section C is going to have most of the information about questions. It's proposal requirements. So section C1's proposal requirements. C2 is the due date and time of submissions. We went through all this stuff. The important piece is C6 here when we're talking about questions and answers. This is what the question and answer period is going to be. So in this case, we have 2 weeks after publishing. So if it's published today on 6/17, that means you got till the end of the business on 7/1 to submit all your questions. And we go back up a little higher here, just point out some other things. We have the schedule that's in section A3. So again, it matches what's in C6, tells us that we have questions due 2 weeks after publishing. And then it gives the vendor community a tentative time for the state to answer those questions. We plan to answer 3 weeks after the publishing. So we give you 2 weeks to ask questions. We give ourselves a week to answer you. And then we publish those. And what publish means is that there will be an amendment in BidBuy. Once that amendment is sent out, every vendor that's listed under the NIGP codes used on the solicitation will receive notification that an amendment's been published. It'll have a brief description of what that amendment is. So if I'm posting questions and answers, the description you're going to get in your email from BidBuy is going to say the state is publishing questions and answers round 1 or round 2 if there's multiple rounds. And that'll give you that answer. For questions and answers, all questions are submitted to the contact that's listed in BidBuy. The email is listed on the general tab in BidBuy, so you'll have the contact information right there. No questions are going to be answered over the phone. State does not answer questions over the phone, and no questions will be answered back to the vendor specifically. The only questions that may be entered or answered back to a vendor, if you were to say I'm the lead, you email me, is a process question. So you're asking how to enter something into BidBuy, or where you can get help for BidBuy, or something about IDHR or something. So if it's a process question, it could potentially be answered back to the vendor. It would also get put in the Q&A and answered out to everybody. But if you're asking detailed, specific questions about anything that's actually in the RFP, whether it's pricing workbook, desirables, mandatories, etc., those will not be answered back via email. They will be entered into a sheet like this one. So remember our whole series has been going around the squirrel wrangling database. So this would be a sample sheet of questions for the squirrel wrangling database. So when the state receives questions, they log each question into a sheet like this. Some agencies may use an Excel sheet, some may use a Word document. This is our standard sheet. So if I got this question, will the state consider extending the RFP submission deadline? As soon as I got that question, I would log it into this sheet. Most likely I would be accumulating questions until the question period is over. There may be times that the state's going to kind of break it up. Maybe we get a bunch of questions 2 days after the RFP is put out, and we answer those right away. We would publish those right away, and then do a second publishing for any questions asked in that applicable time period still. But we would keep a running tab of all the questions being asked, whether they're asked right at the beginning or they're asked on the last day. Eventually, there will be one final sheet with all questions answered. When this gets published, the vendor name goes away. That column's deleted. It wouldn't say who asked the question. It's only going to have what section of the RFP the question came from, what the question was, and the agency's response. So when you see it as a vendor, you're not going to see any of this column. It would be gone. Just did. That column, and then we would delete this column, and then so this is how we log it, so you can see what we do on the back end. And then this is what you would see when you get it published to you. Question number, RFP document, what part of the RFP the question is being asked from. We do our best as we can to make those match. And then what the question is, and then the agency's response. And then this document will be published out to all vendors via the amendment, so that way every vendor that is interested in the solicitation that's registered in one of those NIGP codes for the solicitation can see what that answer is. It may be, and sometimes you might see questions answered multiple times because 3 vendors asked it. We would log all 3. We would put them right next to each other. You might see sometimes that an answer says, see question 5 because we've answered it already and we were asked 4 times. But the answer will be in there. So we get through the answering part. So we went through evaluations already, how that works. We went through evaluator workbooks. This is questions. So now the RFP is done, the bid submission time has passed, questions have been answered, proposals have been done, evaluations are done. What happens then, right? This is kind of where vendors think it goes into a black hole. They don't hear for months because the state's doing evaluations, etc. So we went through the evaluator workbook in the previous session. We looked at the roll-up sheet in the previous session. So the state, to make an award, sends an amendment out. There will be an amendment notification to everyone registered in the NIGP codes of that solicitation that a notice of award has been published. Notice of award's a pretty simple document. It is, let me grab it one up for you. What you're going to find on the notice of award is some pretty basic, simple information, right? And every notice of award is going to look the same. If I can get it to load. There it goes. So every notice of load is going to have the description. This description is just going to be what the description of the RFP was when it went out. So the description will be JPMC Squirrel Wrangling Database, JPMC. That's why it would have the bid by bid number. It's going to have the agency that's doing it. The next thing is going to tell you the vendor that was selected for award. So since this is an RFP, it's going to tell you the vendor that scored the highest on technical proposals, commitment to diversity, and pricing and demonstrations, which are part of the technical proposals. Line item description, it's an RFP. There's no split award, so it would say all line items. It's going to tell you what the award amount is. The award amount is solely based on the vendor's price proposal. If the price proposal was $5 million, the award amount is going to be $5 million. It's going to tell you how many unsuccessful bidders there were, or offerers. Right, so 1 person's awarded, 7 people bid, so then we have 6 unsuccessful bidders or offers. It's going to give you the price for the initial term, and then any renewal terms would be down here in this next box. Farm leases, concessions, and be nothing you ever see from BidBuy. Those are more geared towards like Department of Natural Resources. And then down here, we got the Business Enterprise Program, Veterans Business Program chart. First thing you're going to find down here is if there was a goal. Was there a VBB goal? Was there a BEP goal? I know we covered those multiple times. Those numbers would be found here on the general tab. This is a PO, but it would be found on the general tab of the bid too. So this one had a 7% BEP goal and a 1% VBP goal. So those numbers would be here. And then this next chart, this is where the state lists all bids. So each of the people that bid on the or submitted a proposal for the solicitation would be listed here. You know, so we got XYZ Critters, and we got Joe's Car Wash, and whoever it may be. It would have their total bid amount, right? So let's say XYZ Critters wanted a lot. It would have their BEP subcontractors, if they have any, and the amount of that BEP subcontractor is planning to receive. And that was, and all firms that submitted a proposal will be listed here along with their total bid amount and any other subcontractors. Next, you'll have the agency contact box. So this is going to give you the same information as whoever was the agency lead on the solicitation. And then finally, this SPO, so the state purchasing officer, that's the agency's independent oversight from the Chief Procurement Office of General Services. They give their written determination for contract award decision. They are granted that power by procurement code. So they would say, in this case, it's an RFP. So based on the factors set forth in this request for proposal, the contract's been awarded to the offer whose proposal is most advantageous to the state. So what that means, we did evaluations, we did price evaluations. Once the agency gets through all those things, the agency state procurement officer or state purchasing officer also goes through all those things and make sure that everything was done fairly, transparently, and done by law and rule. So they go through, once they are in agreement that is ready to be awarded, then they would sign this form. And then this form would be published via an amendment to the vendor community. So what happened? So notice of awards posted. There's a couple things left after notice of award, right? Any vendors that submitted a proposal at that point has the opportunity to protest for 14 days after that notice of awards are submitted. So if you come back to our handy RFP document here, there is a section in here for protest. Tells you how you can protest. Let's see, it's down here in section E9. So say the award submitted and you think, try to what you submit a protest for. You think it was unfairly awarded to a vendor. Let's go with that. So if you think it was unfairly awarded to the person that received the notice of award, was listed on the notice of award, you would have up to 14 days after that posting of the notice of award to submit a protest on why you think that award was inaccurate. That would go directly to the Chief Procurement Office Protest Review Officer. That information on how to do that is in every RFP and every IFB that the state publishes for that 14 days. So this is 14 days after the time of the notice of award being posted to the public. The contract cannot be reduced to writing at that point. We can start negotiating the contract. We can start negotiating the terms and conditions, but a contract cannot be executed until that 14-day period has passed. If there's no protest within that 14-day period, a contract can be reduced to writing. It can be signed and executed. If there is a protest submitted by one of the vendors that did submit a proposal, that's key. You had to have submitted a proposal in order to protest the award. If one did protest, the state could not move on to executing a contract until the CPO's protest review officer made a determination on that protest. So that determination could be, we uphold the protest, and it could be maybe the RFP has to be redone. Or they deny the protest and the state can move on to execution. Within that 14 days, the state would start writing the contract. So we would be taking all the things out of here. So all the mandatories that are not negotiable. So these are contract requirements. There's no negotiating them. They are what they are. You agreed to them when you submitted your proposal. And then we would take all the things out of your proposal and begin formulating a contract. Just going to pull a file up here. I had this open and I did not, so I apologize. So we've looked at this contract template before when we were looking at the invitation for bid, which posts the contract with it. But at the end of the day, the contract's going to look the same. We would take what's in your proposal. We would formulate a contract. The contract's going to have the same form and format as it did for an invitation for bid. There's going to be an overview and purpose. There's going to be supplies or service requested. all this information would come out of the mandatories for the RFP and the desirable criteria answers that you have in your proposal. So we would create a contract based on what's in your proposal. So all this would be brought over. There's nothing negotiable about the mandatories at all. Desirable to be based on your answers. We would pull in any of your exceptions to any terms and conditions, and we would create one cohesive document. We most likely would have required a scope of work, so that would also become part of this document, along with any attachments that went out with the solicitation that we said were going to be part of the contract. So in this case, there was a couple documents that we said were going to be part of the contract, which included the cloud hosting appendix, and service level agreements. So those would be brought into the contract by reference here. The state would get together the whole package, the exceptions, the contract, the statement of work. We would put the whole package together for initial review. We would review your red lines for your terms and conditions and make our first response. And then that is sent back to the vendor to negotiate. That's why it's important that we have a good vendor contact, and we require a good vendor contact to be given with the RFP so we know who we're going to be contacting. So negotiations would happen until both sides come to an agreement on the terms and conditions of the contract. And do we agree that your statement of work matches what you said you were going to give us in the RFP proposal, and that the contract matches what we're going to be in the RFP proposal? So that could take place during that protest period, but it would never go any further than that until that period is over or all protests have been resolved. Once that happens, the state has to submit the contract that has been agreed to and negotiated by both the vendor and the state into BidBuy. And then the chief procurement officer, state purchasing officer, reviews the contract and ensures, again, that it's fair, it matches what was in the RFP. It's been reduced to writing. Vendor would have signed the contract already. Once the state purchasing officer approves the contract in the BidBuy system, which you guys would not see, it'd be kind of a black hole to you. Once they hit that approval button, then the state could execute the contract. So what happens after contract execution? Contract execution just means that we both signed a contract. Great, we have a signed contract. Now what? So a couple of things will happen. There'll be a contract kickoff meeting with the awarded vendor. At the contract kickoff meetings, we're going to cover, contract expectations. We could potentially discuss the invoice schedule that's listed in the RFP, and it would come over into the contract. So if you look at the RFP here, right, we bring fiscal to the table. Here's our invoice schedule. You'll get 5% project initiation. So when the contract's reduced to writing, it's 5%. When system design and development is done, you get another 25% of the cost. Data training and integration, you get another 20%. So each of these milestones, you would get a payment. So we would discuss that and discuss expectations around that. We could discuss the economic price adjustment clauses for the hourly rates. Really, the point of the contract kickoff meeting is to get everybody on the same page. And then there's some new and exciting stuff happening here at Do It in general. Do It is now standing up a vendor management unit. So they would be part of this contract kickoff meeting. Our role is going to be to monitor the contract over the life of the contract, whether that's service level agreements, payments, processes. Are you meeting your milestones? So they'd be working hand in hand with the direct contract owner of the business and kind of helping smooth that process through the life of the contract, whether it's implementation or whether it's ongoing maintenance down the road. To give a point of contact in the procurement department to handle those kind of things. So that process is going to be released here later this year. But the process we did want to get out right now, Reggie mentioned in the opening, is going to begin on 7/1. We are kicking off a supplier debriefing process. Some of the feedback that we received is sometimes vendors don't know why they lost a proposal. So we want to help remedy that as much as we can. We still have to stay within the law and the rule of what we can talk about and what we can't talk about. But we do want to give you guys a process to be able to ask questions, to get feedback. So Department of Innovation Technology has created a supplier debriefing process and toolkit. So this document here, just kind of my quick overview for you guys as the vendor community of what this entails. Because it's not something we've offered really before here at Do It, and I don't think it's anything I've seen offered at the state in general. So we'll share this document out to everyone that registered for this, so you can kind of see what this is for. But we'll go through it real fast. So the purpose and scope, the supplier debriefing process is designed to provide the unsuccessful suppliers with constructive feedback following the solicitation, whether it be an IFP or an RFP. The process is to promote transparency. We want to strengthen supplier relationships and improve the quality of future responses. That's the whole point of the supplier debriefing process, is we want to help you improve the quality of your responses to the state in the future. The supplier debriefing process is going to be an informational session between Do It and the unsuccessful supplier to share information about the evaluation and award process. What's going to be the benefits of this? Suppliers can benefit by enhancing their understanding of the procurement process, gaining insights to improve your competitiveness in the future. So this is your outlet to ask questions about your proposal. When does the supplier debriefing process apply? So this is going to apply to any solicitations posted after the effective date, so after 7/1 of 2026, that result in a contract award of $250,000 or more. So this is a key thing for you to pay attention. It has to result in a contract award. So if a solicitation is canceled, this process will not take place. Only if this contract is awarded to another vendor may this be requested. So I set this up like a Q&A of all the frequently asked questions I could think of for a supplier debriefing process. Thought this was a good way to do it. So Q&A, how's the supplier debriefing process initiated? As a vendor, how do you ask for this? So the unsuccessful supplier must submit a written request to solicitation contact from BidBuy, the same person you would have submitted your questions to during the solicitation, etc., within 15 calendar days of the notice of award. So notice of award goes out today. That gives you till 7/2 to request a supplier debriefing. Who's going to conduct the supplier debriefing? It could be a multitude of people. It may be, but at the very minimum, it's going to be either the portfolio manager, the agency procurement officer, or the lead of the solicitation as posted in BidBuy. If needed, they may bring in other folks. Maybe we need a technical person on the call. So there may be additional folks, but there will always be some representative from the procurement office to conduct and hold the debriefing. Kind of talk what the debriefing process is. It's going to be an informational session between doing the unsuccessful supplier. So we covered this up top. Adopting the supplier debriefing process as part of our internal procurement guidelines. This was answered up top. So this applies after 7/1 if the contract award is over $250,000. And it's got to be a competitive solicitation. So that means it's going to be a request for proposal or an IFB. So that answers the next question. Are there solicitation types or notices which a supplier debriefing process will not apply? So a request for an information, a sole source notice, an emergency notice, a cooperative or consortium notice, small purchases, or ordering from a JPMC or an agency-specific contract. None of those scenarios would require a supplier debriefing process, nor will one be allowed. This process is for competitive solicitations to give feedback to the vendor community. So the solicitation I bid on was posted prior to the effective date, so prior to 7/1, but it may not be awarded for several more months. Does the supplier debriefing process apply? We had to put a cap on this, so no. Solicitation must be posted to the public after 7/1. This is a good one for agencies such as Do It and CMS. The awarded contract is a joint purchase master contract, so it has no guaranteed purchase amount. When it gets to PO, the PO amount says 0 because we don't know who's going to order against it. It's going to have separate orders against it by agencies. So to determine on that if a supplier debriefing process is applicable or not, you're going to use the estimated amount that was put on the notice of award. So the notice of award will have an estimated amount of a value to the state, as long as that amount's over $250,000, which for any JPMC it would be, that the supplier debriefing process will apply. We briefly touched on this, but the solicitation I bid on was canceled without an award. Can I ask for a supplier debriefing process? No, this is only if the solicitation made it to award. Does the supplier debriefing process apply to solicitations conducted outside of DO-IT's purview? It does not. This is internal procurement guidelines of DO-IT. We cannot control what other agencies do. So you may only ask for procurements that are put out by the Department of Innovation and Technology. Should this process be adversarial? No, the supplier debriefing process is not supposed to be adversarial. It's not supposed to challenge the contract award. It's not for you to get on, and I'm not saying anyone would, but to complain about the awarded vendor or anything like that. This is a constructive process to discuss your proposal. It's important to note a debriefing will not occur until the protest period is over. So you have 15 days to schedule the debriefing at the notice of award. The debriefing will not be scheduled in that initial 15 days. The debriefing will not be scheduled until after the 14-day protest period is over. How is it conducted? The debriefing can be conducted in person, by phone, or virtually. We will allow the vendors to make their request on how they would like us to conduct the debriefing. If we can accommodate how you ask to do it, we will do so. That is not guaranteed that if you ask for an in-person debriefing that we will be able to do so. When is the debriefing conducted? So you've asked for supplier debriefing. You asked within the 15-day period. But whenever possible, DO-IT will attempt to conduct the supplier debriefing within 30 days of the written request, but only upon the completion of the protest process and resolution of any related litigation for the awarded solicitation. So if there's any litigation outstanding, it will also not be conducted until that litigation concludes and the protest period concludes. So what information is shared during the supplier debriefing process? So the general scope of the supplier debriefing is going to include an overview of the solicitation process, the selection criteria, the unsuccessful supplier that requested the debriefing's evaluation results. We'll go over strengths and weaknesses of the unsuccessful supplier's response. And then we may ask feedback of you as a vendor community. We can't strengthen our solicitations without feedback of the vendor community. So we would be open to feedback from the unsuccessful supplier about our solicitation process. What information are we not going to include in this process? So there's not going to be any point-to-point comparisons of the requesting vendor's response with any of the other participating vendors' responses. The unsuccessful supplier can submit a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, for any of the other evaluation material that they want outside of the scope of the supplier debriefing process. But we will not be discussing anyone else's proposal besides the person that requested the process. And then is the solicitation lead required to document the supplier debriefing process? Yes, we are going to require documentation. We'll be writing down notes. We'll be keeping track of what we are discussing, who we discussed it with, and that's going to become part of our procurement file. So the companion checklist for the procurement lead. So this is what my staff would be looking at. So you request a process. They're going to verify that the supplier's eligibility. So it was over $250,000. You requested it in an amount of time. We're going to confirm that the solicitations within DO-IT's procurement guidelines, the parameters set. So it's one of our solicitations. It is an IFP or an RFP, and it's over that value. They would then schedule the debriefing. They're going to conduct the debriefing, and then they're going to document the session using the template. Supplier debriefing guidelines. So what are we going to do? What aren't we going to do? So we're going to we'd provide a general overview of the evaluation process set out in the procurement. So we can talk about the evaluation tool as it was published. We could talk about how the master tool, roll-up tools works. We can talk about the way the RFP was written in the desirable section of the RFP. You're already going to have this information, but we can provide the name, address, and total bid price where applicable, the successful supplier in the NOA. This information is already going to be on the NOA. And then we can also give you who submitted bids. Again, you're already going to have this information on the notice of award, but it's something we can cover again at this process meeting. We're going to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the supplier submission in relation to the specific evaluation criteria and supplier's evaluated score. If more than the price is going to be evaluated, organizations may provide suppliers' evaluation scores. So what this means, we could give you a ranking out of all vendors that made it to final price opening. So maybe 5 people made it to final price opening. We can tell you that you were 3rd out of 5th. We can tell you you were 2nd out of 5. But that's as far as we can tell you when you're talking about up against other vendors' proposals. We'll address specific questions and issues raised by the supplier in relation to your submission and only your submission. We'll provide suggestions on how the supplier may improve future submissions based on what you submitted in the one that we were discussing. And we'll receive feedback from the supplier on our processes and practices. Again, it's reiterated that the agency is not going to disclose any confidential information of the other suppliers. You have to have FOIA if you wanted that. Questions unrelated to the procurement process must not be responded to during the debriefing and must be noted as out of scope. So if you're asking something that has nothing to do with the solicitation that we're talking about, or just a general process question, we will not answer it. We will keep a template, and the template will look the same for each debriefing process. Who facilitated it, what the solicitation number was in the title, what was the date, where was the location, who's the company, who's the representatives of the company that attended the supplier debriefing, what documents we discussed at the supplier debriefing, evaluation score sheets, strengths and weaknesses, name, address, total bid price of a successful proponent bidder, contract award notice. We'll have notes for strengths and weaknesses. We'll not down any future improvements we discussed. We'll take note of any issues and escalate those. If it's not already the APO or the portfolio manager doing the debriefing, they'll escalate any issues that are brought forth within the supplier debriefing process to management. And then they'll make a note of any other relative topics. They'll note down anything that was asked that's outside of scope. And then we will close out that meeting. As said, the purpose of this meeting is to give you guys an outlet to ask questions about your proposal in relation to specific solicitations. And that really brings us to the end of an RFP. So we went through the RFP documents, how to read, where to read, what sections to pay attention to. We have went through pricing. We went through proposals and statement of works. We went through commitment to diversity scoring. So we went through a slew of things that are very important to every RFP, and most RFPs are structured very similarly. We wanted to make sure you guys had the tools to do the best proposal possible. I'm going to open it up and read the chat questions first, and then we will open up the floor for additional questions. Try to make sure I cover everything here. So Colleen asks, looks like Alice answered, but just in case, they're saying the document you're showing can be found on IPG's website and downloaded correct. The document being used for training is going to be posted on DoIT's website, along with the link for the recorded session. So these documents that I've been showing on the screen are fictitious documents that I made up to cover this series of webinars. Wanted to have something that you could actually look at and refer to in the future to kind of wrap your arms around the different documents, different processes, and for you to go back if you need to rewatch the webinars. So what about post-bid? Is it okay to ask if a vendor is selected or any further information? I think we covered that, but post-bid, though, the notice of award will go out. You will know the vendor that was selected. You will know the vendors that were not selected. And then we also showed you the supplier debriefing process. Another question, post-award, if your company is awarded, what is the best way for vendors to proceed? The agency will reach out to the awarded vendor once we are ready to start negotiating the contract. Until that first initial reach out, there's nothing for the awarded vendor to do. State has to get the contract together. The state has to review your red lines. The state has to answer your red lines. And then we would have a document to work off. That negotiation process could be done via email. It could be done via live session after that. But nothing would happen until you receive that initial feedback from the state. Colleen, I believe you were talking about the notice of award on your last question. If you're asking this document success for those vendors who bid. So the notice of award that has the winning bidders and the unsuccessful bidders document is a public document. Anyone is going to be able to see that document. It is part of public record. So that's out there for everyone. Can we request records for the RFPs, bids for any recompetes we target to understand and analyze one bids? If yes, how that process works. Anything could be requested per FOIA, the department's Freedom of Information Act FOIA officer would read that request. If it is something that we can agree to, most cases you get those back within 5 days. Unless it's commercial request, then the state gets 30 days. That determination will be made specifically by the state's FOIA officer. All right. Then we got a new question. What about insurance requirements? They're often needed after award, but proof of ability to be insured is initially considered. What if a person can assume full coverage required? Is the award null and void? Yes, if you can't meet what the insurance minimums are in the contract, it would become null and void. That is not negotiable. The mandatory criteria at the beginning of the contract, one of the terms and conditions set forth. So you have to be able to meet that up front. Now, there are some things that could potentially be negotiated. Limitation of liability cap could potentially be negotiated. But if there's hard insurance requirements, those are going to be required. Right. Do we have any other questions as we close out this series for the year?
Well, let's see if anyone has any questions. Let's see. Yes, I can unmute you if you raise your hand. I'm looking to see if I see anyone with a question.
Let's see. Tina has asked, can we contact any of you if we have further questions? Yes, you can contact myself, and if it's a question to answer, we can answer. Or if it's a BEP question, Reggie is our BAP manager. He would be the one to answer those questions. But if you reach out to either one of us, we can direct you in the right person to answer your question if it is something we can answer.
Okay. I see that Takara would need some BEP help. I'll include my email. She can email me. Gov. Send that to everyone. All right. Any other questions, or give a couple more seconds here in case any questions come up, and then we'll be able to close this out. Not seeing any more questions. I just wanted to let everybody know in FY or fiscal year 2027, we will discuss post-award compliance in a webinar series. So be on the lookout for that. And all recordings for this series will be available on our YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and search the Department of Innovation and Technology, and you should be able to locate our YouTube channel. And all documents, examples discussed during these webinars will be posted to DOIT's website at doit.illinois.gov under the Events tab. And all the documents discussed during these webinars will be there, including the new U plan and also the good faith effort document and all the documents that Chris has discussed during these webinar series. All right, so is there any more questions here? Nope. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Chris, for closing out this series with such valuable insight into pricing, clarification, and post-submission phases of the procurement process. Throughout today's session, we explored some of the most critical and often overlooked aspects of state contracting, from developing effective pricing proposals to managing amendments, responding to clarification requests, and staying engaged after submission through the new supplier debriefing process starting on July 1st. As we conclude today's webinar, we also conclude the Mastering the State Contracting Game series. Over the course of the sessions, we've covered the procurement process from multiple angles, helping vendors better understand how to navigate solicitations, develop stronger responses, maintain compliance, and compete more effectively for state opportunities. We hope this series has provided practical tools, clearer insight on how state procurement works, and greater confidence in pursuing contracting opportunities with the state of Illinois. I'm Reginald Lampkin, and on behalf of the Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology's Office of Supplier Diversity and the IT Procurement Office, I want to sincerely thank you all for your participation, engagement, and continued interest throughout this series. A special thank you as well to Chris Brinkmeyer and all our presenters and partners who contributed their expertise and helped make these sessions informative and impactful. We appreciate your commitment to growing and strengthening participation in state contracting. Leveraging diversity in technology procurement is taking the summer off. We shall return in September with new learning opportunities, and we look forward to connecting with you again in future educational and outreach events. Again, stay dry out there today and have a powerful and productive day. See you in September.